Elon Musk is exploring blockchain use in the U.S. government efficiency effort. Conversations said to be held with multiple public blockchains. The technology may be used to track government spending. And this is very funny. It almost reads like a hit piece, like it was planted, because like the idea of like, oh, we're going to solve the government's problems with crypto is like such a meme. But it does seem like there's some truth to this, but it's
also
unclear.
interesting. It's also interesting because the biggest criticism of the World Economic Forum has been their historical push for central bank digital currencies.
Yeah.
And in many ways, bringing the government on chain and having all of this stuff take place on the blockchain is what a lot of people were always afraid of. Now, this is different because presumably we just use stable coins.
Yeah. There's some stuff here that does actually make sense, but at the same time, for a naive reader, you can be like, wait, the guy who is promoting Dogecoin wants to use that for Doge, and it's this meme coin. It sounds very unserious, and I think that's kind of the angle of this article, but let's read through some of this. So Musk, who leads the Doge effort, has mused to close allies about the idea of using a digital ledger as a way to squeeze costs out of the government, said one of the people who asked for anonymity because the discussions hadn't been made public. There's been talk of using a blockchain to track federal spending, secure data, make payments, and even manage buildings, the people said. People affiliated with Doge. Yeah.
One thing that's interesting, every mainstream media reporter, journalist is hammering everybody within the inner circle of Doge, within the outer circle of Doge, within the outer. I get multiple messages a day being like, hey, do you know what's going on in this?
I just got off a call with a reporter who was like asking me, oh, what's going on? Do you know anything?
And the funny thing is, and almost everybody within Doge has a deep mistrust of mainstream media. And so nobody wants to talk.
No.
But there's enough people involved that the story is just coming out. But it comes out in the form of people saying Elon was musing about this, and then that ends up being
it's like, what does that actually mean? Like, you could muse about anything. It's very silly, but the talks have a certain intuitive logic, given that the name of Musk's department is a cheeky reference to a cryptocurrency, Dogecoin, that lives on the blockchain. President Donald Trump has also been quickly putting in place cryptocurrency-friendly policies. On Thursday, he signed an executive order establishing a working group on digital assets that includes key members of his administration. So people are talking about, I think within the crypto community, the number one thing people want is, just clarity around regulation, like what is legal, what's not, instead of this gray area. And then maybe Bitcoin National Reserve is big, and then maybe clarity around
and then the
betting markets or
the other big one is around the tax treatment of cryptocurrency gains. Eric Trump came out and was saying we're going to have no capital gains on American crypto, which you said, I think this was on point, that if you want to encourage the reshoring of the cryptocurrency industry, which is, I do believe, in the long-term benefit of the United States. We've been the home of global finance in many ways for such a long time. We don't want to have crypto come along and have it be in Singapore and Dubai and all these other places. Like, the more that money is here, the more it will,
and the talent and the actual companies and stuff, and they're easier to regulate. Like, Silicon Valley for a long time was like so dogmatic about, you can't even build a startup outside of San Francisco. Like,
people wouldn't fund you.
Being outside of America was completely off the table. It was like San Francisco or maybe New York, and then Miami got in the conversation, Austin got in the conversation, LA was taken semi-seriously, but really it was like, you need to be in a major American metro with a serious university.
But even it took Snapchat and Honey for people to...
It took a long time. And
nobody wanted to... Like, the insider SFVCs would tell you, I want to invest in your company, but you have to move to SF.
Exactly. And then once crypto started getting so attacked by the federal government, all of a sudden it became, oh, sure, you're in Singapore. Like, that's a reasonable thing to do, which would never hold for any other company.
Yeah, and a lot of the major conferences were not in the U.S. Right?
And so while I think, like, having this weird capital gains treatment where a stock would be taxed but a crypto wouldn't, probably makes no sense to have different classes there. If you can have kind of a one-time incentive for people to reshore, and then eventually the industry will be so built up, we won't be talking about, oh, this startup just went from 0 to $1 billion really quickly. It'll be like, no, there's like a Visa, a MasterCard, a Goldman Sachs of crypto. They're all here. They have thousands of employees. They're established. They're not going anywhere. And so, you can bring the taxes back up. which is probably what would happen. But let's go back to Elon. He says Doge is charged with modernizing federal technology and software to maximize government efficiency and productivity. Trump has said the group will work with the White House Office of Management and Budget. It's kind of like the federal government's HR arm, to identify spending cuts.
Longhouse division.
and finish its recommendations by July 4th of 2026. Musk enlisted about 100 volunteers before Trump was inaugurated to write code for his projects.
Yeah, and this is the crazy thing. So because Doge is not... What is the exact corporate structure?
Well, it was not like a think tank funded off of Elon's balance sheet.
Yeah, because it was set up as a think tank, an independent think tank initially. Many people have already gone and done a tour within Doge and already left.
Yep.
They had done that before Trump had actually been inaugurated.
Yeah, it was like policy papers.
Which is cool, right? It's showing this sort of urgency. You see this with venture-backed founders that end up, working for 6 months on their startup before they incorporate, right? It's that same sort of founder mentality, which I think is cool.
And so it says Trump's business associates chose the ledger associated with the Solana cryptocurrency to issue the Trump and Melania meme coins that have drawn interest and criticism in recent days. It is, though, unclear which blockchain Musk's team might use for its projects, and the talks may end up going nowhere, which is, very reasonable.
Yeah, so I have a post here from a guy named Kale Abe. He says, "You're mid-curving it if you think Elon is going to use some other blockchain to track government spending through Doge. There's literally no other blockchain that could handle this other than Solana. Elon executes. He's not going to choose something that won't work." At the time, whenever this was screenshotted, it only had 5 likes.
Yeah, I just searched for it specifically.
I don't think the community has spoken on it yet, but Solana is, would be one of the top choices if they weren't going to build their own blockchain.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Which is another.
So they could also
you could also fork it.
Exactly.
But either way, the Trump and Melania meme coins are the meme coins that were launched out of the White House in many ways. Those being on Solana was a huge win for Solana in general, which has obviously benefited from many of the products that are purely speculative, as well as products that have consumer use cases have been on Solana just because of the speed and then liquidity that's on the chain.
Yeah. And so the article continues, the idea of using blockchain for large-scale projects isn't new, although applying one to an enterprise as large as the U.S. government remains an untested concept. Years ago, during the Web3 boom, a slew of large companies such as retailer Walmart launched blockchain efforts. Most of these projects use private blockchains that didn't make transactions publicly viewable. And so there's always been this question of like, if you have a private blockchain, like why not just use a database? Like Walmart has full control over their database. They just log all the transactions. Like what is the blockchain really doing? And there is a question here of just like maybe instead of having this cycle of there's the federal budget that goes out, money gets spent, and then basically journalists need to issue Freedom of Information Act requests to get data months later. It needs to be redacted. It's like, well, maybe you could just have a real-time dashboard. That doesn't need to be crypto driven. It can be just a database that's open and you can query it.
There's some argument for it to be completely transparent because if you are a taxpayer, your money is going towards a lot of these efforts, right? Even if it's just tiny fractions. And so there really is a clear argument to say, this taxpayers should have full visibility into how their money is being spent, right? Outside of like black ops, government programs, things like that.
On the flip side, like it could be like, it's like building in public. All of a sudden, like your adversaries know exactly how much you're spending and they can say, oh, okay, the US is spending X dollars on education. If we just spend a little bit more per capita, we can like compound and like beat them basically or something like that. It is a theory. Just like, if you know your competitors' margins, you can often squeeze them by dropping your price to the point where they make no margin.
And you make a little bit.
And you make a little bit. And then over time you put them out of business and then you have a monopoly. And so there are risks to like open source accounting effectively. Sam Hammond,
one thing that's interesting, oftentimes budgets get set, so money is allocated and then it doesn't actually get spent. We saw this in the LA fires. Like last year there was, I think this came out earlier this month, but there was something like $1 billion allocated by LA County to fight homelessness. And they only ever spent like $500 million, which is kind of a bit like, everybody I think now generally wants less government spending.
Yeah.
But if we thought it
If
was
you have the
right
money,
to
spend
allocate
it.
the money, like
Yeah.
homelessness is still a big issue here, right? If you look outside, I'm sure we could see, and so the fact that they allocated it and didn't spend it is also bad because, like, okay, then why did you ask for this budget in the first place? You knew that it was going to need to be spent in this period. So.
Yep. And so Sam Hammond, the chief economist at the Foundation for American Innovation, that's FAI. I've been to a bunch of their events.
We met. I got to meet Sam at Heroicon.
Oh yeah. He said that an internal government blockchain could be used to track spending, documents, and contracts in a way that's fully secure and transparent. But the question of whether you really need a blockchain to do that, since conventional databases can be used in a similar way and with fewer downsides.
But you can't speculate on a database. It's much harder.
Yeah, exactly.
You could make a poly market that was based on will the Department of Health spend their full budget for the year if it was public.
Like you literally can in speculate on the profits of the federal government in the form of bonds. It's just very boring and you only earn 3%.
I want to be able to do it. I want to do a 10-leg parlay on the government spending.
I mean, that's basically just like some sort of like crazy levered ladder on like how the bond spreads will trade over the next few years. Like you can
hedge funds figured it out.
Oh yeah, you can get crazy beta in your bond portfolio if you work hard enough. So public blockchains like Bitcoin and Solana come with their own problems, given that such ledgers are governed by decentralized networks of computers. So who owns the voting blocks all of a sudden? Is it 100% centralized, controlled by the government? Well, then what's the point of the decentralized? If it
also opens up some crazy attack vectors. So North Korea's government has put in a big effort. They have a lot, like they have effectively kingdom level efforts to hack various blockchains. Like if you're in the cryptocurrency industry, everybody has examples where they interviewed somebody and their resume made no sense and they like crushed the coding screen, but then like if you actually ask them about it, they can't really answer. And so North Korea has been will try to get people in to these organizations to then hack them. And they have other efforts. And so if you can imagine if the U.S. government just had $1 billion in a wallet on Solana, like
try like $1 trillion.
Yeah. It does open up the North Korea is going to be going like, all we have to do is get this
attack.
We have to just get this one
Let's
clerk.
build a massive data center just to attack this thing. So one issue with the government using a public blockchain is that they would have no control over the entities. So whoever owns the tokens would be able to change the database potentially. I think that loss of control would be a problem for governments, but some bigger institutions have started using public blockchains for business purposes in recent years. And this was something I hadn't heard. BlackRock, for example, has issued a money market fund on the ledgers of a few different cryptocurrencies. And the California Department of Motor Vehicles has digitized millions of car titles on the Avalanche blockchain. I had no idea. That's wild.
And you don't hear much about Avalanche anymore just because the narrative is so
Solana
dominated
focused,
by Solana. At least because meme coins are sort of the dominant meta. But that's like it's funny because like Avalanche for sure in their seed deck was saying, hey, we're gonna actually get the DMV to digitize titles or whatever. And unfortunately, that's way less profitable than just like having a casino, meme coin casino, exactly. Right? And that's why Solana probably trades at 20x, I would imagine.
Probably like
Avalanche,
maybe 2000.
I don't know.
Yeah. There was like that. Do you remember the Solunavax meme? It was like Solana, Luna, which was like the Terra Luna thing, and then AVAX, which is Avalanche, and it was like this big movement of like, let's move past Ethereum and get onto like these higher performance, high speed cryptocurrency chains. And Solana really emerged as like the power law winner very clearly. But they closed by saying, if Doge pursued the technology, it would likely dwarf any government project seen in the US to date. I don't know that that's necessarily true. Like there is something interesting. I think like the most optimistic take you could have here is maybe just that, like on paper, there are probably more downsides than upsides to managing a public blockchain instead of just a database. And just like, it's the same thing with like, oh, can we make wires go through 24/7? It's like, yes, but there's a ton of regulation and a ton of like tech debt, and some of these systems run on like Fortran and old mainframes and stuff. And so just having a greenfield project can lead to an amount of like forward energy and progress that you're just like, hey, we're starting fresh. And I think that if Bitcoin or cryptocurrency is like a justification for starting fresh, it could at least bring some energy. But overall, I am not very bullish on blockchain use in the US government. I don't necessarily think it's necessary.
Yeah, there's some stuff that comes up to me. You remember during COVID, there was a bunch of people taking advantage of the emergency PPP loans.
Yep.
People, there was a bunch of fraud associated with that.
Yep.
There were people dealing, SBA dealt with a lot of this stuff, and there's some argument. But the thing is like that the government has a record of everybody. They have strong records of where all the money was sent anyways. And so does it just introduce more chaos if the average person can just start saying, hey, why did this person get 200K? Why did this person get 50K? And like, what, we actually just
PPP
need
stuff's, it's public. And people dug through it and found like one of them was like Ford Raptor LLC. And it's like a guy who like clearly set up an LLC just to buy a Ford Raptor for himself.
With the PPP money.
With the PPP money. And there was a lot of that. And there's really like very little accountability.
And again, that's the same thing as like a database does. Like I would actually love to have a follow-up to this piece like tomorrow if somebody can say, here is the definitive argument for why the US government should run its financial operations on chain.
Yep.
And I would totally give that an hour to like actually hear out the case. But these sort of hearsay articles from the mainstream media that are just looking for clicks don't really...
it does seem like this was driven by... There's a lot changing the government. Every startup and company is looking for opportunity, and everyone is pitching them. If you have a security company, you're like, oh, maybe I'll go in and like get a security contract. If you have a defense company, obviously you're going to the DoD. But even software companies are like, hey, how can I get in on this and like help for good? And also... maybe I'll make some money real quick, and that'll be maybe a little bit less scrupulous. And it seems like, some people at Doge were open-minded and like, yeah, sure. Like let the crypto guys come and give us a pitch. We'll like, listen, we're open-minded. Maybe it doesn't really seem like me, but I'll hear them out. And then all of a sudden it's like, he is seriously considering it. Like he took a meeting, and it's like,
I think the argument would have to be, if the U.S. government moves on chain, we will save $100 billion because of these key areas that we're going to be able to better identify wasted spend. And I'm not sure that can't be done with better databases and better and a government that's oriented around efficiency, right?
If every line in this article is replaced with Elon is considering using Databricks and AWS to comb through non-story. It doesn't get printed, even though that could be something that actually happened in reality. And it's just not a story. Anyway,